Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September-October edition of FAA Safety Briefing Live. I'm Paul Prydecker, joined by my friend and colleague, Susan Parsons. Susan, how are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing okay. Wisconsin is getting to... I'm sorry?
It's only 99 here in Phoenix. It's cooling down.
Yeah, I was going to say Wisconsin is beginning to feel a bit like fall. There's some color changes in the trees and temperatures are in the 40s in the morning, although it's 80 today. So it's just that time of the year. But all is good. So, Susan, I know you're editor of the magazine and have so much input into this, and we always enjoy your articles. I continue to do my work as a full-time retiree working full-time. So
That's
it's a lot of fun.
About
Continue to do some Part 91 flying and some contract work for a few places, so everything's good. And we're always happy to present this to you. There's a lot of informative things, but most importantly, this is an opportunity to get wings credit. And Susan, what's the two-step process?
Well, hopefully, first of all, hopefully you get wings credit because you learned something, and that's the main goal. But the wings credit is great, and now there is a simple process where you just do a couple of clicks instead of doing, I think it used to be 7 clicks to get to where you take the quiz to get credit. It's just 2. I've tried it out. It works. Several of us have tried it, and we're very glad that improvement has been made.
So this is the kind of our standard slide where we talk a little bit about the magazine. And the other point about this is it's been 60 years. It's gone through several variations and several names. But what's the overall purpose, Susan?
Well, it's right here on the screen that we are the safety policy voice of the non-commercial general aviation. And the goals you see there to raise awareness of FAA resources, to explain the safety and regulatory issues. And really, one of the most important things is to encourage continued training. You'll also see over there on the departments, I think I mentioned this before, but each of the regular departments has a specific mission focus. And I think there's one more issue where you'll see our celebrating 60 years. And after that, we'll be celebrating more years. But I think it'll be a while before we have a milestone anniversary again.
Well, and you're right. It is to, encourage continuous training. And there's so many opportunities to do that. We hope that this is one of them that you add regularly to your training mix. Every issue, there's things to learn in it. I've learned several things in this issue just by, getting deep into the articles. Some of it is new acronyms, some of it's new terminology, and just some other fun facts. So let's move on to what our current issue is about, and we'll get on with the program. The first thing I want to comment on, though, is I have, the copy of this here, and that's a wonderful cover, and I know where that airport is, and I know you do. It's one of my favorites, especially the control tower has some nice architecture and color to it. So where are we?
Well, I don't think they picked this one to curry favor with me, but whether or not they had that in mind, it worked, because this is my hometown airport. It's Phoenix and the Phoenix Control Tower, which it does have unique architecture and copper clad, and it's very distinctive. I loved the way that the light is in this photo, and then we did the overlay of the radar. So our designer did a really nice job taking this photo and turning it into the cover that we wanted for airports and airspace, which is our thematic focus for this issue.
And it's great. It's a lot of this is refresher material about how to get back in the system as we're able to. I didn't actually know what a shrimp boat was until I read the article about airspace and ATC. We covered another communication article with a bit of a test in it on don't drop the mic. Susan, you have a nice article about adventuring, and then we have 3 others.
We do. And all of them have information, and I think you might have learned several new acronyms, and we all know how important acronyms are in aviation.
Well, I think the one I learned was UTM, which actually has a acronym embedded in an acronym, Unmanned Aerial Systems Traffic Management. So it's an acronym embedded with an acronym.
Those are good.
Jump Seat Column by Rick Domingo, ramping up. It's really talking about some of the resources available, and there's 2 or 3 issues of FAA Safety Briefing magazine, which are cited in this, which we've been involved with. Back to Basics, the challenge and response issue, which was a fun one, and then also surface safety.
Well, and so it starts out with his idea that this is ramping back up into hopefully more active aviation life. But one of the points that is made here is the fact that proficiency with flying skills is important, but, and I think that's just something people don't always think about. Muscle memory is sometimes easier to restore than that mental muscle memory, which requires, frankly, sometimes a lot more effort. So all of the issues that were cited in the Learn More are about getting back to basics and to proficiency. But we particularly wanted to look at airports, airspace, and ATC, or traffic control, in this one. So that was one of the reasons for the focus. It's kind of part of the series of what do you have to know and do and think about to get back into the swing of things. The other thing I would note here is that this is Rick's last Jump Seat column for us, because at the end of this month, he's retiring after almost 3 decades in the FAA. And there'll be an acting columnist in the next issue, but Rick has, he blue skies and tailwinds to him, and he says here, I wish you all the very best.
Well, very good. And you're certainly right about there's sort of two types of memory we're trying to develop, and also memory about flying. I think most of us would agree that, the adage, oh, it's just like riding a bicycle, is almost true. Your scan may be a little bit soft, but it doesn't take long to get that back, and the actual act of flying the airplane, will return pretty quickly. But communicating on the radio, understanding all the things you have to do for flight planning, keeping up with ATC instructions, and just remembering your procedures and profiles, that exercises our brain a little bit more. And, there are certainly steps we can take to improve on that so that we can be ramped up and safe. So, I have to admit, I was a little confused when I first looked at this, talking about shrimp boats and satellites and what that had to do with ATC. But
now you know.
I do know. I understand now. And it talks a lot about the beginning of air traffic control. And a couple of things I learned was Archie League, who was a Missouri native operating mostly at St. Louis Lambert a long time ago, was considered the first air traffic controller. There's some other historical data about how ATC has developed. But as you know, during the EAA convention, I volunteer for EAA radio and do some on-the-air radio hosting things during that week. And almost every year, we interview representatives from the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, because they want to acknowledge the Archie League Award that is presented to a controller or controllers who have done a pilot save. And we're often able to, on the radio show, replay some of the audio between the controllers and the pilot involved in the event. And it's a prestigious award, and it's a tribute to how air traffic control can go above and beyond and help a pilot that might be experiencing problems, or above a cloud deck, or maybe not sure of position, or having some other emergency. So those are some of the things I picked out of that. And also, I didn't know that the first 3 air traffic control centers were in Newark and Cleveland and O'Hare. So it's a good article to give you some background on the early days of air traffic control.
Well, the shrimp boat part I've known for a long time, because one of the books I read way back when was Arthur Haley's Airport, the original book, and there was a lot in there. One of the subplots was about air traffic control, and at that time they used, because this was in the 60s when the book was set and written, they talked about shrimp boats and how the controllers would sit there and push these little markers around on the scope to keep track So I thought, wow, it's amazing how far things have come, because if you haven't had the opportunity to do one of the operation range checks that controllers, radar centers, and towers do, hopefully those will come back from the pandemic restrictions eventually. It's always worth seeing, and it's just fascinating to see how far we've come from the shrimp boat technology, and also how far we're going. This is the whole more routine operations, and this gets to where the acronyms that you've learned, Paul, with the UTM, and trying to also figure out how to manage not just drones, but also space, which obviously has been a lot in the news lately, including just yesterday.
Well, and there's some interesting numbers here to give us an idea about the expanse of this. There's approximately 14,000 controllers. They're supporting basically 5,000 aircraft, in the U.S. at any given time, at 19,000 airports. And then, as you mentioned, the connection with the FAA's Office of Commercial Space, which is the one that is, regulating commercial space traffic. I think there's been 50 commercial operations so far this year, is what I recall, but there's been 400 total, and it's growing, of course.
Oh, we addressed some of that in our new entrant issue. The other thing I wanted to mention while we were on here, you probably saw this, the makeshift control tower was a wheelbarrow.
I did see that.
I must say that I prefer towers like the Phoenix control tower much better than wheelbarrows, but it's kind of an interesting mental picture, standing there with a wheelbarrow.
Well, and using lights and signal flags and, what we would consider low-tech items today, but it's certainly advanced into, the next gen, it's here and it continues to grow. So, like I said, it's always, and as you said, getting an idea about what happens behind the scenes, if we have the opportunity to do that, is always a good thing, because I'm sure, I know I've certainly experienced, being a pilot and trying to get a controller's attention, thinking I must be the only one up here. Why isn't he talking to me? Because it's all about me, right? But of course, we have to realize that controllers have a lot of aircraft they're working, and some of them are on different frequencies, so we don't really know their workload. So they deserve a lot of respect, and working with them is always a pleasure.
Yeah, the FlightAware and Flight Radar 24 both. Even though traffic hasn't entirely come back to where it was, it's pretty impressive to see how many airplanes are in the sky at any given time.
Well, and since we just finished the EAA convention, at the end of July and early August, I saw screenshots of airplanes coming out of Oshkosh, and it's a solid line of yellow, moving essentially south or, in other directions. So it's quite a sight to realize how all of that is managed. We typically cover FAA faces a little bit later, but this one, I know why it's up front, because this gentleman is a very talented individual, and it sort of as an introduction to so many other things.
Yeah, Peter was one of our writers. We got to know him because he wrote several of the pieces for us and provided a lot of information when we did our new entrant issue earlier this year, and found out that he's a pilot, he's a controller, he's a journalist, really good writer. And so it just seemed like if we wanted to do an airports and airspace issue, that he was an obvious choice. And he was fortunately willing to cooperate. Most of our subjects are very gracious about that. But he started off with that. Remember the little headphones connected to the armrest in Channel 9 on United? And like, oh yeah, I did that.
When I traveled on business before I was doing aviation professionally, if I had an option to tell the reservation people at the travel agency to put me on United, I always would say that in the hopes that I could get plugged into Channel 9.
Oh, I would sit there and listen to the whole thing. It was great.
I don't know if everybody who's listening knows what we're talking about, but I'm sure there's many who do. Channel 9 on the Entertainment Center at United used to be a direct line to the flight deck, so you could hear ATC talking to the aircraft and vice versa. So it was
before you had moving maps right on your phone or on the seat back or whatever. So it was a lot of fun. But Peter has he became a controller, pilot, instructor. Then he went off to do other things, and he's been in and out of the FAA. But fortunately, we have him back working on policy and rulemaking for UTM. So as he puts it, asking the right questions and recommendations in plain language. And he's quite passionate about aviation safety culture, regardless of what you fly. And so, as I said, he was kind of the perfect choice to feature and introduce. And one of the, I will say, one of the reasons that we do this particular department is we want to, the FAA can seem like just a big monolithic agency, and it's not. It's made up of people. And the people in the FAA are very dedicated to the work that they do, we do, and passionate about aviation. So it's like, hey, this is how we're like everybody else.
Well, and as I think back to all of the ones we've done, I'm always impressed by the varied experience of the people. They've had multiple interests in aviation. They've had a life sometimes outside of aviation, and their work within the FAA seems to be interdisciplinary in some ways. So it's cool. And he's certainly in a growth area, because if he's trying to manage and write policies and procedures for airspace related to drones, that's a big job. Because as we talked about before in other issues, the drone population, of course, is skyrocketing, and the utility of them are as well. This is a fun part, and it goes along with the idea of, how do you get back into the system? And if you're used to flying at a untowered, non-controlled airport, and you're going to do some cross-country work into a different facilities, how to get your ATC skills back. We've done several articles on communication, what to say, what not to say. And this is a great reminder and a great review of, basically it's a test. There's 5 scenarios and with a multiple choice answer. So it's great.
Yeah, quiz is a much friendlier word somehow, or it doesn't sound as scary as test. But yeah, we the shared situational awareness, and Paul used the term shared mental model for briefings, but
Yes.
But it works here too. Clear communication is really important. And there are so many terms that we obviously always want to encourage people to look in the pilot controller glossary and to use standard phraseology. But in this case, Jennifer, the author of this one, she worked with several controllers to come up with both the questions and the answers and what you call the distractors, the wrong answers. And last time I checked, I think this article, this piece, because I think people like quizzes and crosswords like we had in the previous issue, this one has gotten a lot of attention, and it sparked some debate. And in some cases, people have questioned whether the correct answer was correct, but we got them all from active controllers, and we've gone back and checked with controllers to say, hey, did we miss something? And so we're pretty confident about the way that this is framed. So yeah, take the quiz and see how you do.
The one thing I like a lot about this one is scenario number 4 is about standby. So if you call a controller and he says standby, I mean, it typically means that he or she is working on something else. They'll get back to you. But don't forget that we can use the same thing.
Yep.
I was on a flight just a few nights ago, and midway, and not much is going on. And then all of a sudden the controller comes on and says, I've got new routing for you, advise ready to copy. And my first words out of my mouth were standby, because why? All right, I've got to find a pen. I've got to get the paper. I've got to get the light turned on so I can see, what I'm doing, and get ready. So when I said standby, I mean, he understood that to mean I'll get back to you. So I think, between standby and unable, I think those are 2 pilot friendly words that we should probably use when we need to use them.
Well,
So,
I guess it's not good to say if they said I've got a full route clearance to say unable. Um,
that's true.
Not appropriate. However, yes, I always taught that unable is one of the most useful words that you can have because you're communicating very easily. I can't do that. Let's talk about what are my alternatives. So those are good phrases to have.
Yeah, I have frequently asked controllers, if I have a one-on-one with them in some setting to say, what's your number one pet peeve? The answers are pretty consistent. Use of Roger inappropriately is not a big favorite of controllers because it doesn't really mean anything, and it's discussed in this article. And then another pet peeve, which I've heard, is being a little bit too wordy. Just give the facts. You don't need all of the words to express it. So yeah, it's a shared responsibility, and the system works, but there's some ways you can refine it. So
also, one last thing before we leave this slide, when I'm trying to help people write briefing papers for senior officials or to give presentations, the advice that I give is be brief, be clear, be done, be gone. And I think that is also applicable when you're on the radio.
For sure.
Hotspot.
This is a good one. It's all about hotspots. And the author, Tom Hoffman, he sort of introduces it by saying, you've had a wonderful flight. It's been a good flight. You've maybe negotiated some weather, one thing and another. And, then you land and you have some sort of, runway incursion or something doesn't go quite well. And I think I've often told my students this, is that the flight's never over until the engine's off and there's chocks behind the wheels. You have to keep flying, and that means situation awareness on the ground and things like that. He uses flying Cal Airport as an example with some hotspots. I used to, when I operate in and out of O'Hare, I used to just brief that the entire airport's a hotspot, so you have to pay attention. So.
Fortunately, a lot of that in Chicago is a little bit different. But yeah, Flying Cloud has 6 hotspots, and these days, and this is a really neat thing, a lot of the electronic flight bag apps will highlight them for you. The FAA is doing a lot to highlight them on charts. And there are lots of ways to figure out where they are so that you can, well, this is another case of see and avoid, know and avoid where they are. The points in here are all very standard advice, and we're building on some of the material that we presented in the the surface safety issue a few months ago. Don't keep going if you're not sure where you are. Stop and ask, for directions. There's a lot less shame in asking for directions than in going where you're not supposed to be. Especially at a busy airport. And then this article also includes some things that are repeated on the slide here. What are the self-briefing questions?
Sure.
And I like the wording here that will help you avoid being scalded by contact with a hotspot.
And it's another part of it too is you can't necessarily assume a taxi route is going to be the same just because you've had it the past 3 or 4 times. Which means check the NOTAMs in case something's closed for construction or, it's temporarily shut down for something else. This to me is, how to get to the runway and how to get off the runway are briefing items that you can either brief and make notes to yourself, or if you're in a crew or instructional environment, brief it so that both pilots are on the same page about what's going to happen. And then if I go into airports I'm not familiar with, but I know where the destination, the name of the facility is, I just don't necessarily know where it is. I'll tell the tower controller, when we land, we're going to such and such. And, I'm usually met with, oh, that'll be a right turn off. Okay. So, it pays to just sort of brief and stay aware. So
and if they don't tell you, you can always ask, because Again, being uncertain of where you are in busy airspace or busy ground space is not a good idea.
No, there's too many reports that we've all read, through the NASA forums or through the airline ASAP reports that typically show if you're, rushed or distracted, something on the ground like that could happen. So,
and don't be that pilot.
Exactly. I used to tell people, I'm trying to set the example, not be the example. So.
Oh, that's a good phrase. Well,
Yeah.
Here's another way that you can pre-flight your destination. And this is something that Paul and I have both tried out separately. I mean, I had looked at them before, but I think in preparation for this, Paul, you looked at some of these.
Well, I looked in, Madison, Wisconsin, which is just a few miles away, and there's a video about getting around at Madison, so it's cool.
So what the FAA is doing, and you see on the little screenshot here, the ones in green are already done, the ones in blue are in progress. But these are the videos that I've watched, and I've watched several of them. They run about 7 or 8 minutes, and they show you the picture that you would see because they're filming from the flight deck. So there you are, and you are going someplace, but the chart excerpt is up in a corner. There are charts that show you where the hot spots are on the chart and then what they look like on the ground. So as I wrote in the beginning of this article, and it wasn't a joke, when I was learning to fly, we had to make my instructor always had us make little runway diagrams. And one of my colleagues who was at a similar point in training to me, he and I used to have this little informal competition for whose diagram could be better, and his were a little very artistic. I mean, he would have these wonderful little trees and everything else on it, and then show them to me very proudly. But we don't have to do that anymore. We got the videos, and these from the flight deck videos. They're free. They're growing. Every time I turn around, there's a new one. I've looked at the ones for airports around here, Paul. I didn't realize there was one for Madison, but I probably should go look at that just to see what's on that one too.
Well, and the other part too is, in addition to these videos, certainly some of the popular flight planning apps, depending on your level of subscription, will show 3D, more or less data coming from satellite images. So it gives you another opportunity to see what the surrounding environment looks like, and just the overall layout. Gives you the opportunity to almost fly the airplane into the runway that you're anticipating. So, you can have a head start as to what it looks like. So there is one thing I would say, I'm not suggesting that we go back to stone tablet and chisel. And I do think that these videos are a vast improvement over what I did. However, I want to put in a plug for the fact that sometimes just the work of transferring something, sketching it out for yourself, there's something about embedding that in your head because you're deciphering, depicting, that helps you mentally get it. So use all the tools. There are much more, far more and far better tools now than just a few years ago. And I imagine they will get better still. But whatever you do, and this is all about using whatever you can to prepare yourself as best you can. Well, and in a roundabout way, you're making a plug for, I think, understanding the basics. It's equivalent, in my mind, to saying, well, we have apps that can decode METARs and TAFs, but I still want to be able to know how to read a METAR and TAF without having an app. It's the same with looking at an instrument approach chart. We have the avionics basically tell us everything we need to know. But I like to know the basics behind it. So,
yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a really good point.
Another flight planning tool, and this discussion is about TFRs, Mission Possible. What I got out of it, Susan, was TF. The people who are working with the agencies and creating TFRs are trying to balance, in some cases, national security and safety with airspace utilization.
Well, when I was in the building, I used to go downstairs into that office periodically for one reason or another. So I got acquainted with some of the people who, at least at that time, were in Systems Operations Security. SOS is a kind of a fun acronym. They are people who they know, they care, they work with a lot of agencies, and they get, as the article points out, they get a lot more requests for TFRs, temporary flight restrictions, and other special use airspace. They get a lot more requests than they ever grant. The goal is to try to provide for the safety and security that is necessary, but to shape the scope and the time limits and the access abilities in a way that just minimizes the impact on the majority of the airspace users. So they do not simply say, oh, sure, yeah, we'll give you a TFR. They go back and forth, and what do you really need, and how do you need it, and what do you need it for? So it's a balancing act. And although, as the article points out, TFRs are not exactly popular with pilots, but I'm really glad that we have the people who work for us who are so dedicated to making sure that we scope and shape them appropriately.
Well, and certainly in the past few months with the heavy fire activity on the West Coast, you see a number of TFRs, and those are simply there to protect the firefighting aircraft, so that they can do their job effectively and not have conflicts with, with just the general flying. So
I see why they need those too. There have been TFRs pretty close to my home airspace. Not as many, thank goodness, this summer as last, but Paul, you and I have been there. We've looked at them, and we'll see the tanker aircraft headed in and out of the operated areas. And if you bring up one of the flight tracking apps and look inside the TFR, you will see, and you can follow the tracks of some of the aircraft that are in them. Lots of circles. It's pretty busy airspace, so obviously it has to be there.
It really is. And I think I saw this in the article. If you go to tfr.faa.gov, you will get a web page listing all of the TFRs that are in effect, their altitude, their times, where they are. So, just a simple web search will bring them up as well if you're, want to get kind of a big picture. So I got another new word I learned out of this, vertiport.
Did you look it up?
Well, I did actually. I mean, I think I knew what it meant, but I wanted to make sure. Okay. So this is all about how the FAA Technical Center is doing research to better understand the needs of heliports and also vertiports, which are essentially vertical takeoff and landing facilities. The interesting number, it's in the next to the last bullet point. 90% of accidents were over a certain period of time were attributed to the infrastructure. So this is the FAA's way of working with all the facilities to make this better and safer.
Yeah, the advisory role is out there, and the new advisory circular for vertiport design is under consideration. So there's a heliport design advisory circular that's out there now with the recommended standards. And there are a lot of people who get a say in what this guidance is. So you'll see down there that there were a lot, they looked at accidents and incidents, talked to stakeholders, published paper. So a lot of thought and effort and research goes into developing these things. But yeah, I actually, when I first saw it, which was previously, I looked up vertiport myself. And vertiport to me was one of those words that sounded like the cartoon Jetsons I used to watch when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So you can just, I'd kind of like to have my own vertiport actually, with my own little vertical thing to play with. It would make it would make traffic a lot easier to deal with.
Well, the future is now, I think. So
I think it is.
Yeah. So we often devote some time to the name of the column is called Drone Debrief. And again, this is all about how, in fact, your colleague who wrote, was featured in FAA Faces,
Yeah.
His group and other people like him are trying to find ways to get more airspace utilization to accommodate and manage the drone traffic. And what I learned in this was earlier there was a grid produced with 1 mile squares, but now we have quad grids.
Quad grid, that's what they're called, yeah. Split into
which is now a 1 mile square put into quarters, which gives them the ability to to define drone airspace a little bit more precisely and to open it up more.
Well, it does, and because we thought this article was useful. There's so many remote pilots now. We normally, our departments are normally just one page, but we made extra space for this one to talk about the more airspace becoming available for drone operations. The quad grids are interesting, and I think another of the points that is kind of inherent in this article is that the FAA is actively, constantly working to do what the goal is, to safely integrate UAS drones into the National Airspace System, not to create some kind of separate parallel structure, but to find how to integrate these aircraft, because they are aircraft, into safely operating with everybody else. And these quad grids are a new way to do it. And I love the creativity and the innovation that these guys are doing.
Well, and also to be able to operate, I can't put the acronym together, but it's beyond line of sight is, the goal for some of this is to be able to operate your drone at a point beyond which you can see it. And that has airspace implications in it as well, because you need to know where that airspace limit might be. So it's interesting work, and I'm sure it's consuming a lot of time just because of the proclivity of the drone population and how much that's expanding.
Well, and also because airspace creation, it involves a lot of risk assessment, safety risk management, looking at so many factors. So the effort, it looks simple enough, but the effort that goes into determining that this new tool can be safely deployed is enormous. Yeah.
This was also kind of took me back to the past a little bit in terms of how do we know how many aircraft operations there are, especially at non-towered airports. And this article goes on to say, well, we can make estimates based on how many people are based here, how many operations we see per day, do some extrapolation. At the airport that I learned to fly at in just west of Madison, there was a time when that airport was going to be expanded, but in order to make the case for expansion, they had to come up with some accurate numbers about, well, how many operations, because that drives things like economic impact to the community. Can we justify, improvements to the airport? And this article goes into the technology of that, basically transponder based, and a group from Purdue University put together a program to, basically put transponders at some of these, or transponder receiving equipment to count airplanes.
Well, I had honestly, until I read this article, I had never really thought about counts and how they did it. And Jen's, the way Jennifer sets it up is kind of funny, that she always thought maybe somebody with binoculars and a clicker and an umbrella sitting there, click, click, click for every takeoff and landing. And of course, that's not the way that it's done. The fact that we can use technology like ADS-B in order to do it, and so far they've collected a lot of information at a number of different airports, and this transponder signal counting technology that's being deployed is, as it says in the last bullet, it's accurate and cost-effective way to do things at the non-towered airports, which has always been where it was not exactly consistently valid or accurate data. So I did know that airport traffic counts had a lot to they are considered along with all kinds of bigger infrastructure decisions. So it's important, but it's also important for it to be accurate. And now we have tools to make it more accurate than ever before.
And that actually is a quick lead in to the next article, which is about.
I thought you would like that lead in.
Yeah, thanks for helping me out.
You're welcome.
It's all about airport grants. A couple of numbers, or at least one big number pointed out to me was, since the program has been started, there's been $96 billion awarded to airports. And there is a website that you can go to see what airports are receiving money or have eligibility for improvements. And they're widespread. It could be a runway extension. It could be new taxiway lights. It could be programs for noise abatement.
Well, and that's the
fencing.
thing. Environmental projects. There are all kinds of different projects that go forward, and there's the article goes into a lot of things I think people might find interesting, because especially if your local community is looking for some kind of grant money to do improvements. There are also grant assurances that go into it, because you have to demonstrate, if you're going to get this airport grant money, that you can meet the requirements, the conditions that go into it, carry out the assurances and obligations in the application and grant agreement. So it's, and as Paul said, there are a lot of different things that this money is used for. But I was particularly interested, especially since our last issue was about embracing the environment, that environmental projects are certainly ripe for consideration for some of these things.
And I went to the website that was noted in the article and pulled up Wisconsin, and sure enough, there's 2 airports in Wisconsin that are that have a grant. One's in La Crosse, which is out on the west on the Mississippi River for some construction work. The other is Madison for a noise study. And I was trying to connect the dots about what's going on. And then I remembered that the Air National Guard unit located at the Madison airport is slated to get F-35s. So yeah, I have a feeling that related to the noise and noise mitigation for the neighborhoods around the airport.
That's a good reason to do that.
For sure. This is a fun article that you put together on the advantages of adventuring. Tell us about it.
Well, this was about moving from this sort of the study of airports and airspace to some of the things that come from using them, and the columns here talk about it's the way that the whole article is structured. Plans and practice, and I talk about this in the piece as well, that years ago in Virginia, I think Virginia was one of the first states to do one of the visit every airport. They called it the Virginia Aviation Ambassador Program. And in the closet behind me, I don't need it very much this time of the year in Arizona, but I do have a leather jacket that's my Virginia Aviation Ambassador jacket. And I'm very proud of it, because it means that I visited all of the public use airports, and I went to the Festival of Flight, and I visited 4 or 5 aviation museums and checked all the boxes to qualify for it. But in addition to being fun, it was quite a learning experience, because it's the planning and flying to unfamiliar airports. You've got to change the plan for all the weather and operational issues that come up. You get to meet other people, and the people and pets. I met a lot of airport dogs. I don't think I've met too many pets, but there was one airport that the airport manager kind of had snacks out for pilots, and they were so eager to have us that it was kind of hard to get away. I just felt guilty leaving again. And then the places. Virginia, I'm not sure about Arizona. Virginia was starting to standardize some of its local airport designs, but there was still a variety of some of this and some of that, and you could look at pilot shops, and then there were lots of places for the $100 hamburger or whatever else you wanted to eat.
Of course.
And yeah, plane spotting. And that was fun too. I always used to love plane spotting because certainly in flying around airports in Virginia, the flight school where I learned to fly had changed ownership, and some of the airplanes that it had dispersed. And so it was kind of like seeing old friends. I would find, oh, that was the airplane that I took that on my cross country. So you would see them. And then I also mentioned here the 1990s Skyhawks, the original ones the ones that came out after the General Aviation Revitalization Act. The first 100 were produced with Echo Sierra in the tail. And that was in honor of Ed Stimson, who was very instrumental in getting that legislation passed. So I had the pleasure of knowing him. And so I always look for the extra special airplanes that got their tail numbers for him. So keep a lookout. You're probably all over the country now.
Well, and you said that Virginia had a program, Ambassador. I know Wisconsin has a program. It's called the Passport Program, and it's the same principle. Go to the airports in Wisconsin, get it noted in your sort of passport that you've been there. But other places do too. I was looking on the web. There's, I think, North Dakota has a program like that. I think I saw programs in Florida, certainly on some of the western states. So it's just a way to have a reason to, go to a different airport. But from the learning standpoint, as you brought up, this is a great way to sharpen our skills, because if we really dig in and do the planning properly, we'll get into the chart supplement. We'll need to learn, more about, a lot of these are non-towered airports, about operations there. We need to pay attention to NOTAMs, of course. So it's a way to, sharpen our skills with the purpose of seeing something new.
Yeah, AOPA has a program like that too. So there are lots of ways to do it. The point is, there are advantages of adventuring, so go out and use them.
I like it. This is a great article, great photo. It's about, you said no place like Jerome.
Yeah, the picture I took at the TWA Hotel, and I'll leave you to read the piece, and hopefully you might also be interested in reading the book that that gave me the idea to write it this way. It's an kind of a funny name, Naked Airport, A Cultural History of the World's Most Revolutionary Structure. And I read it several years ago, and I was quite fascinated. I learned all sorts of things about airports that I never knew before, but and about how they have evolved. But the point that I really wanted to get across in here was, and the quote from the book is there, this is a critical part of our infrastructure, our aviation infrastructure, and a reflection of how humans have developed. And so let's appreciate airports, and no place like Drome, especially when it's your home drome. Well,
and there are certainly some airports that are fairly utilitarian, and they're rectangular, and they serve their purpose. But when I think about airports, for example, the terminal at Washington Dulles, that has a very classic shape to it. This terminal, the TWA terminal at JFK, is certainly reflective of the past. And we both had the opportunity to be there, and it's quite elegant on the inside, because it goes back to, the days in the 60s and early 70s.
Who knew?
Rotary dial phones in the rooms. It's pretty interesting.
That's really fun.
Yeah. This is our article about maintenance and mechanics, and we call it nuts and bolts.
Don't forget the electrons part.
I'm sorry?
Don't forget the electrons, nuts, bolts, and electrons.
That's right, the electrons, which is actually more about what this is about. It's a bit of a question and answer article related to what are the requirements for putting ADS-B in the aircraft if it is a non-electric aircraft. So the first thing it goes on to say is what is an electric aircraft, meaning it has to have an engine-driven electrical system, not just a battery and a radio. But if you have questions about that, if you have one of these aircraft and you have questions about ADS-B, just go through this. It gives a bit more detailed information about what's required. But also, it makes a very strong case for saying that suppose you have an aircraft that does not require ADS-B, there still is a benefit of using ADS-B for traffic information and other advantages. So the next two are medical articles, and they're both about hypoxia. And your
oxygen
colleague,
requirements and hypoxia. Yeah, I mean, this kind of gets into the whole idea that if you're operating in the airspace, particularly if you're operating at certain altitudes, you need to be mindful of oxygen. The oxygen, the requirements are here, but I also wanted to point out down here at the bottom, there are demonstrations that you can do. The FAA has a version. I was fortunate enough to do that at Andrews Air Force Base a few years ago, and if you have the opportunity to do it, I would encourage it, because you get a sense of what actually happens to you when you are in an oxygen deprived state. There's a set of things that can happen, but for every single person, it can be a little different. So knowing how your body reacts is a really important tool.
And she references many of the rules and regs that are related to what part you're flying: Part 121, Part 135, Part 91, and the Basic 61 requirements. So it's a good rule and reg review, but also, as Susan said, if you have some experience in this, then you can know what to expect. And the next article is really about what is hypoxia and what are some of the contributing factors to it. A lot of it is about your general overall health. Also, it talks about prolonged sitting, and of course, the recommendation is to be careful with scuba diving and flying at higher altitudes.
Well, and one of it's mentioned in this article, and also in the previous one, the reason that oxygen requirements exist, it really is important to understand that hypoxia, I mean, sometimes the symptoms of it are euphoria. You're too happy to know you're in trouble. And so you have to be super careful. And although it's not a perfect device, I mean, I'm kind of enjoying having my blood oxygen monitor thing on my wrist nowadays with the watch that I have. So I periodically check it. Not that I'm at particularly high altitude, but it's kind of fun to look at.
Well, and you can even just get a small pulse oximeter, from your preferred drugstore they're relatively inexpensive, and you can actually get an idea about how things are going as you're making a flight.
Exactly.
So, this is sort of our aviation roundup, and several interesting things here. The new runway safety sim. This has been in the press a lot, and it's about, as we've talked about before, runway safety activity, learn to say unable, and there's information and quizzes embedded in that as well.
Well, there are, and the other things that are mentioned in here, one is the recreational UAS operators are required to take a test, and there's information about that test. It's fairly straightforward, and it's called the Trust Test. The recreational UAS safety test, I think, is what the acronym stands for, but I thought that was kind of a fun way to do it. And then there's also a little piece in here about new weather cameras coming online. We've covered so many of those, certainly in Alaska, but in Colorado, and now I see them in other airports. And they're starting to, I mean, this has been something, we talked about this, we had a specific article about these several issues ago. Sometimes I lose track of which issue it was or how long ago it was, but we, at the time, we knew that new ones were coming to, I think Colorado was the one that was coming online at the time. And since then, there, as you say, there are more, and they're spreading across the country.
Well, and it's just a great way to get some real-time data, and again, to sort of assist in flight planning.
It's kind of like it goes along with those from the flight deck videos too. You can
Exactly.
get a better view of where things are.
Yeah. On the recreational USA operators required to take a test, quiz sounds better, by the way. So.
Oh, touche, you got me. You're right. But hey, the acronym stands for test, but it's not a difficult test.
There we go. So what are they, Susan?
This slide was up there. We put in ads periodically for, we obviously don't sell commercial advertising, but we put in things to bring your attention to some of the resources available. We've talked in the previous, especially with the data-driven decision-making issue, we talked about the GUARD app, General Aviation Airborne Recording Device. You can do the QR code here and go download the app if you wanted to use that. Another thing that we do are safety enhancement topics, and these are available, short blurbs about things. September one is service bulletins and the aircraft owner, which has got some really helpful information into it. And October is pilots and medication. So these are things we make available on the FAA website, and we just wanted to use the magazine to bring attention to the fact that these are resources available to you.
Well, the GUARD app sounds like something I want to try out, because it's always good to get more information and data about, you know, how we're operating our airplane. So I'm going to try that.
Go for it.
All right. We often talk about this. There are several ways to give feedback, and your agency is quite responsive to that. So
we are, and one of the things that we do, and for feedback here, you can write to us at safetybriefing@faa.gov. We have a couple of people who write to us pretty regularly to tell us what they liked or didn't like or about an issue. And somebody caught a typo a few issues back that we had all missed, and it was a little embarrassing, but at the same time, we were, wow, you got sharp eyes, and then we were able to fix the online version so nobody else will see it. And then you can also communicate with us directly at FA Safety Brief, our Twitter stream. And I sometimes forget to mention, we have a GA Facebook page that is moderated and very much, so I need to add that to the slide. But we have a pretty active user group, and the feedback you see reflected here in forum comes from all of those sources.
Sure. Well, as we begin to wrap up here, we go through this. There are several ways to get FAA safety briefing. Of course, the website.
The website, yeah, it's we do have the current issue online, and we've moved up the archived issues. It used to be you'd have to scroll down quite a bit to find it. We've moved the link to archived issues up quite a bit. The FAA Medium blog, you can sign up for spams notices and get you can get an email when the new issue comes out, and it will provide links to specific articles in mobile friendly forms. So, and then there's the print edition, which you've got one in your hands, Paul. So
I do.
People who prefer to have the print edition, and you can have all of them. You can have print and you can have PDF, and you can look at it online. So lots of different ways to join us. Very
good. So I know that the November and December issue is already in preparation, and tell us about it.
Well, STEM is a big thing, but so is STEAM, and I'm kind of big on adding the A to it for the arts. So we are going to be looking at pathways to aviation, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So I think we're kind of calling it full steam ahead.
Very good. Well, we'll look forward to doing that, and we'll announce the date of the next Safety Briefing Live. And just a reminder, don't forget to
absolutely
go through and get Wings credit for this. And there's the various ways that you can link to some other avenues to stay apprised of what's current, as well as some of the things that we've done in the past.
Yeah, the archived courses are pretty easy to look at. So that's a wrap for this time, Paul, and we will figure out a good date for November and get together again in a couple of months. So Thanks for everybody for joining us.
Take good care. Be safe.